Breaking news tonight, a 10-year-old boy struck by a stray bullet after shots ring out in Frankfurt.
When you hear something over and over again, time and time again, you may begin to believe it. The notion that poverty is the main cause of crime, the notion that poverty and crime goes hand in hand, is a false narrative. This narrative has been pushed by the mainstream media and, in my opinion, has been adopted by the people at large. The reason the mainstream media has pushed this narrative is to deflect the main origins and roots of the problem, to keep the people and communities that's affected the most by these crimes ignorant of the real issue, or to give many of them an excuse to not hold themselves accountable. By statistics, fatherless homes and crime goes hand in hand. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. 85% of all children that exhibit behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. 85% of all youths sitting in prison grew up in a fatherless home. 80% of rapists motivated with displaced anger come from fatherless homes. 75% of all adolescent patients in chemical abuse centers come from fatherless homes. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. 71% of teenage pregnancies are to children of single parents. 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions come from fatherless homes. 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. The crack epidemic was a war, a silent war, waged on the black community. The masterminds behind the war won the war without raising a hand nor fighting the battle, because many of our men were soldiers on the front line of it. And many of our men didn't know that this war was actually waged against the detriment of their own people. It gave them a taste of money they never had, luxury cars, homes, women, designer clothes, but however, it came with a sacrifice. That sacrifice was them poisoning their people, their community, killing one another, going to prison, which ultimately left many innocent children fatherless, neglected, vulnerable, and misguided. It tricked them into thinking that they had a seat at the table, but in actuality, they was always on the menu, and they're still on the menu. And this is a big reason why we see our youth in neighborhoods, especially in the inner cities, in the condition and state that we see it in today. Due to the rough and terrible conditions that many of our youth grew up in, being fatherless, neglected, vulnerable, and easily influenced, I can understand why many of them are the way that they are. But however, I don't accept it. And neither should any of us. Not only Let the masterminds behind the silent war not raise a hand nor fight a battle, but they profited at the same time. The American prison system makes over $74 billion a year in profit, which African American men make up 34%, which is 25,160,000,000. And if you combine that with the African American women, which make up 18% of the U.S. prison population, it would be an astonishing 38,460,000,000 in profit per year. Nobody put a gun to our heads and literally forced us to sell drugs, to poison one another, to kill one another, to hurt one another. The powers that be may have planted the seeds of division amongst us, but however, we watered it to make it grow, and it has grown bigger and bigger, big enough to decline the African American two-parent household from 67% in 1960 to 20% today. Now, you can see why many of our young men have no self-control over their sexual urges. And you can see why you'll have a young man who has 8 babies by 8 different women. And you cannot build a strong community when you have children all over the place. You cannot build a strong community when you have children that's neglected of having a father around. When you have children that suffer from drug abuse, depression, poor decision making. The cycle repeats itself over and over again. It takes sacrifice, it takes discipline, and it takes courage to build a strong community. There is also another seed of division besides the crack epidemic that was planted by the powers that be that's very profitable, and it's called the family court system.
Federal and state child support bureaucracies have become harmful to children, primarily using this program to undermine the father-child relationship. The federal and state child support bureaucracies have become harmful to children, primarily using this program to undermine the father-child relationship.
Many of our women been used and tricked by this system, presenting themselves as having the best interests of children, when in actuality is just to, in most cases, make a profit at the expense of making more children fatherless, in which they are more prone to crime, prone to the juvenile prison system, prone to an early grave, prone to depression, prone to drug abuse, prone to make poor decisions for the lack of having a strong man around. They limit many honest working fathers to being financial and weekend dads. 2 days a week, 8 days a month, 96 days a year, 1,728 days within an 18-year span. Think about that. That's 54 months. 4.5 years within an 18-year span that a man gets to spend with his child. That's 13.5 years that a man has been away from his child within an 18-year span. That's nowhere near enough time that a child needs, wants, and is ultimately deserving of. With the family court system, has done to the black community in terms of damage is almost equivalent to the crack epidemic, if not the same or worse. But they didn't do it by themselves because they need our women to do it. They need our women to participate, which not all, but many did or do out of spite, and at the same time ignorant of the negative impact it has on our youth, and in particular our young men, who growing up without a strong father have the emotions of a woman and aggression of a man, who first point a conflict resolution is a gun that's used to murder our sons, nephews, uncles, our men. And as we can see, even our daughters, our nieces, our granddaughters, our women. Enemies don't always present themselves as enemies. Sometimes they come in smiles, hugs, and bearing gifts. You have to ask yourself, does the gift of the system giving you the upper hand over your child's father, limiting him of having a bond with his child, being able to guide and give them direction, worth the curse of you possibly losing your child to the streets, drug abuse, depression, or what have you? It's not a matter of blaming the man or woman, but rather to acknowledge that both of us, in some form or fashion, have or are being used by the system that doesn't have our best interests. So therefore, we have control and power to not allow ourselves to continue to be used, and that the peace and prosperity of our children and communities are in our hands.
Victims is a 14-year-old shot 18 times this afternoon, and a 16-year-old boy killed yesterday less than a mile from where a 21-year-old Temple student was shot.